Welcome to the Baseball Corner with Austin Orman.
Payoff pitch. Hot drive. Deep left. Grand slam. Bobby Witt Jr. wins it. Sensational.
And Nick Sainert.
Here's the 0-1. This is going to be a tough play. The Cubs win the World Series. Brian makes the play. It's over. And the Cubs have finally won it all.
On 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com. Keep an eye on the ball as they go around the horn from local prep baseball to college baseball and even the minor and major leagues. Now, here are your hosts, Nick Sainert and Austin Orman.
That's right. Welcome in a wonderful, wonderful Monday night to be talking baseball. You got both of us, Austin Orman and Nick Sainert, with you here on the Baseball Corner. Just got back from the College World Series last week. A fun time up at Blur. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Kevin Schnall ejected on LSU's way to winning the national championship, and lots going on in Major League Baseball. 402-464-5685. You got anything you want to contribute to the show, we'd love to hear from you. Big thanks to Sartor Heman Jewelers for sponsoring our text line. Nick Sainert, how are you, my friend?
It's good. My favorite time of the year, I think our favorite time of the year has officially concluded with the College World Series wrapping up over the weekend. So much to talk about. And I think there's so much to talk about. It's getting covered up by what happened yesterday in the bottom of the first inning in Game 2 of the championship. That we'll get our opinions out on that, and I'm sure we did throughout the course of the day today. But I think more so, it's there's so much other stuff that I think we want to get to. Mm-hmm. There's very little bad. Like, there is very little bad and very little controversial topics. There was a lot of good that happened at the College World Series, though, over the last 2 weeks.
Let's just start with that. Let's dive in. What are you going to remember about the 2025 edition of the College World Series?
I really think there's a couple of things. The storyline coming into it was certainly, it was that no team was coming back, right? Mm-hmm. Like no team that made it in Omaha last year in 2024 is now back here in 2025. So obviously that storyline kind of prevailed right at the beginning. I think, though, looking back, Dave Van Horn's still without a title when it felt like this was the year that Arkansas had their best chance. It was not a chalk field. It was not a field to where you had the top, 7 of the top 8 national seeds get in. It was not anything like that, right? And while Arkansas had the highest seed out of anybody in the field, they were the 3 seed coming in. They looked, outside of the no-hitter, they looked like the bright lights kind of startled them a little bit. Now, there was some really questionable decision making by some of the players in that game against LSU, but ultimately, I'm looking more so at like the rest of the bracket, and you look at teams like LSU. You could tell from a program standpoint they belonged, like they operated like they belonged, and I think. It's one thing to do it in the regular season, obviously. It's one thing then to take it over into regional and super regional play. But when you are on the brightest and biggest stage, who is able to keep the composure and who's able to look like they belong there is a very, very important piece of the puzzle.
A team that I didn't think looked like they belong was Arizona. Someone had to go 0-2 in the top half of that bracket. I wasn't sure it was going to be the Wildcats. I didn't think they were very competitive, even in that 7-4 game against Coastal Carolina. And then Louisville beats them 6-3. I expected more from Arizona. I really did. Murray State, I thought, showed up okay. I think they represented all right, really pushed UCLA in that first game, especially in the later innings. And then, of course, gauge what happens every so often. Yeah. So, shout out Murray State making it. Not many 4 seeds do. To your point about Arkansas, that's really what I'm going to take away, I think, from this whole tournament, is that, I know we'll get to the championship here in a second, is that I felt this was Arkansas's year, except that the bracket didn't do them any favors. No. If you think about how it was, quote unquote, supposed to set up, it worked out perfectly. You got the 3 and the 6 in Arkansas and LSU. I think those were 2 incredibly balanced teams, enough star power that a couple of the names, but certainly not like LSU a couple of years ago in their title win. And it turns out Arkansas has the Golden Spikes winner in Vahiva Alloy. But the problem for Arkansas is that he was one of the ones that didn't show up in the big moments.
Yeah.
The middle infield didn't do it. Obviously, Davalan in left field there. But I was thinking, this is going to be Arkansas's year. I didn't love Vandy or Texas in the 1 or 2. Thought that they, should make it to Omaha, obviously, given their standing. But I was on the Arkansas train for a while this year. And the fact that they lost is less surprising, I think, than how they lost. And I know we talked about it a little bit, but when you remember this Arkansas team, what's going to be maybe that one blunder that stands out the most to you?
Is it weird for me to say that it's less about what the players did and more about Dave Van Horn? Because here is where I'm getting at. Like with Vahiva Aloy, obviously the best player in college baseball, and I think he rightfully won the award.
Sure.
I think his play is more so than the play out in left field. It is more notable, where he elects to go to third base and get the force out at third rather than going to second and attempting a double play. Let me start with this. I don't think the play out in left field is as big of an issue because it's a guy trying to make a play. Sure. Like we know it as a couple of guys that have played outfield. Obviously, a lot of my time was at catcher, but you were outfielder, and so like you understand. You have to read a ball off the bat in the blink of an eye without even thinking it. It has to be innate. And so through that, you have to read the speed trajectory, the angle of it as well, coming off the bat through the sky and into your glove. And there's such a thing as like up and down balls versus line drives. Up and downs are a lot of times the ones you want to take a dive on and want to take a chance on because more than likely they're not going to roll very far past you. That ball that the left fielder had to attack, it was not an up and down. It was a line drive. It was hit decently well hard off the bat on an angle or on a drive rather. And he took a risk. But also in that type of moment, I think it's hard to blame a guy for saying he's going 110% and he makes a mistake. I think more so you ask yourself, okay, what set up that opportunity? And that's where I go back to the Vahiva Aloy thing, to where unfortunately you have your guy that is going to be a first round MLB draft pick here in next month's draft. And on the biggest stage in one of the biggest moments, you look out and say, okay, who do you want this ball hit to? Like if you could set it up on a tee for Arkansas and say, okay, who do you trust the most in this moment? Well, of course, you're going to go to one of the best players in the country, and you're going to say, he's one of our leaders. We want the ball to be hit to him because he wouldn't mess up, right? And in the regular season and in the early stages of the postseason, that reigns true. However, on the biggest stage, when the lights were the brightest, it's not like the ball was taking him towards the third base bag.
No, he's coming in.
If the ball's taking him towards the third base bag, absolutely. You go in the direction of your momentum. You don't try to stop. You don't try to reverse course, and you don't make a routine play harder than it needs to be. But you did. And unfortunately for Arkansas, it was just a mental lapse by Vahiva Aloy. And if he gets two, great. If not, nobody's sitting there going, oh, he made the wrong play. He should have gone to third. I think, though, then the bigger issue is that the next batter, Jared Jones, you chose to hit your pitch to him.
Probably the best hitter left in the game, not just on LSU's team.
Yes, best hitter left in the game. And one of the guys that he was 4 for 4 in the game against you that day, and he had started to catch fire when it mattered most in the postseason.
Just tied the game with that solo shot the half inning before. And
that's where I think Dave Van Horn comes at this a little bit more, and it's more important that we look at Dave Van Horn. As bad as I wanted him to win a championship,
he didn't earn it.
He didn't earn it. He didn't deserve it because he could have walked Jared Jones and put a force out at every base, and the next hitter could have hit a single and it walked it off, and that's fine. However, I think that there was a frozen moment there with DVH where he was shocked and somewhat in disbelief because the camera panned to him and he just had this blank stare on his face. And there's a difference between a blank stare and a difference, and then like a competitive, like
being locked in the moment.
We're locked in the moment type of approach. And he can phrase it in the post game as in, I didn't think about it at all. We wanted to put our best stuff up against their best stuff. We felt like we had the competitive advantage on the mound. You can frame it all that way, and that's fine. But I truly believe, and I still, a couple of days removed from that specific game, still feel like there was a lock in the mind of Dave Van Horn, and he just didn't realize or think, okay, base is open. there is a base open. Their best hitters at the plate. Strategically, analytically, our best play here is to give Jared Jones a base.
Because that runner doesn't mean anything.
Exactly.
That run doesn't mean anything.
Exactly.
Give yourself the force at every base. And it's weird to think about a team needing to overcome a coach as good as Dave Van Horn.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what Arkansas needed to do, is what it turned out. That would have been the Thursday game?
Mm-hmm.
No, the Wednesday game.
It was
last
the Wednesday.
game on Wednesday.
That's right.
Between Arkansas and LSU. You shouldn't have to overcome your coach in moments like that. And sure, players make plays, but at some point the coach sets the tone. Obviously, Dave Van Horn's not going anywhere until he decides to retire. Fantastic coach, legend of the game. But it goes to show you, even at 64, Dave Van Horn's got to get better.
Yeah.
And this wasn't a team, Nick, when you look at Arkansas, that had quite the star power or the depth maybe to overcome a Dave Van Horn, like, say, the team that beat Nebraska back in 2021. There were studs up and down that lineup, up and down that rotation. They had a little bit more margin for error. Obviously, they didn't use it either, right? We talk about freeze ups and not delivering. Neither did that team in 2021. I don't want to put this one all on Dave Van Horn. I don't want to put it all on the players. But you really are just left wondering, if it wasn't this year, when is it going to actually happen for Arkansas? They'll invest. It's still, I think, a baseball school to some degree. I don't know where baseball falls in the pecking order. I kind of talked about this a little bit on Friday during the Corner 3, because you see Arkansas football in the SEC, they have to invest. They can't afford to fall behind. Arkansas basketball went all in on John Calipari with the Tyson Chicken money to get him there, and they've been big spenders in NIL. Baseball, I think, means more to Arkansas than either of those sports does, at least from this end of things. But they're not going to get that same level of investment. Yeah. So I think this was another maybe missed opportunity for Arkansas in the last, 3, 4, 5 years, where baseball could have said, we can be number 2 ahead of men's basketball. And Dave Van Horn just has not been able to bring that title home.
Yeah, and I think, like, you asked, the storylines of the College World Series is that it's these blue blood powerhouse programs having to win games in comparison to what we're used to seeing from those programs in a non-traditional sense.
Right.
And I think LSU perfectly embodies that. And you talked about the difference in the way LSU wins games. I pulled up their 2023 stats from that year that they won the national championship. And this was that team that had Tommy Tanks, Dylan Cruz. What was it? Trey Morgan was on that team, who's currently in AAA with the Durham Bulls. Like, you look at that team, and that was a program that had 144 home runs as a team that season. That is absurd. They had,
it's almost 3 a game.
They had 9 guys with double-digit home runs. 10th. I mean, can you imagine this? Trey Morgan was actually 10th on the team in home runs hit that year with 9. That is absurd to think about, especially when you look at a program. I mean, we can bring it back home to Nebraska, where you're fortunate if Nebraska has 2 guys with double-digit home runs. And so that just shows the difference in talent and in blue blood status, I suppose. But yeah, it's bizarre to think about that we're sitting here, and that's where I think we were so shocked that it could have been, that you couldn't attribute part of Arkansas's loss to coaching decision, because Dave Van Horn is one of the best in the game. And whatever happened in Omaha last week, that still is true. This is still a guy that has over 1,300 wins at the NCAA level, at the Division I level more specifically. He just won his 900th game back in March at Arkansas. I mean, this is a guy that's nationally revered, but he's missing the big one. Where then you look across the field in the other dugout, Jay Johnson, who gets elevated after Paul Maneri leaves, and he's already got 2. And you sit there and go, what does he have that Arkansas / Dave Van Horn doesn't have? And I feel like the differences are minimal. Right. And so then you have to look at the coach and the coaching staff.
And again, that's not to say Dave Van Horn is going anywhere.
Certainly not.
But at some point, you got to identify what is the issue. If you're Dave Van Horn, how do you get better? And I think a part of that for him is he's got to know who he is and how he operates. He's got to own whatever keeps happening in Omaha. And you think back to, a handful of years ago, that dropped pop-up against Oregon State. That was by far their best chance to win a title. That's not on Dave Van Horn at all. but the response was how his teams came out, how his team wasn't ready to go. They're one out away from winning it. And then they all but no-show the very next night. Maybe it's a Dave Van Horn thing in terms of, does he recognize his shortcomings, what he needs to be better at? Or is it assistant coaching? You know, sure. I don't know their assistant coaches, but is Dave Van Horn covering for his, shortcomings or maybe oversights, not necessarily, as a person or a tactician, but do you have a guy in the dugout whose job it is to say, hey, Dave, here are the analytics of this situation. Jared Jones is good. Let's put him on first base since his run doesn't mean anything. Sure. Was there that guy in the dugout for Dave Van Horn? Does he have the coach that's the emotional leader, right? Yeah. Because I tend to like a coach like Dave Van Horn, who's pretty stoic, who's business as usual, who's no nonsense. I appreciate that even-keeled manner from coaches. We know Dave Van Horn can turn it up when he has to. Mm-hmm. But Dave Van Horn doesn't strike me as the pregame speech in the locker room guy. Dave Van Horn doesn't strike me as the rally the troops guy. Yeah. And maybe some of this is, I'd say survivorship bias or the opposite of it. If Dave Van Horn had won a title, we would all be sitting here saying, look at how calm and collected he was in the moment. Bullets are flying. Dave Van Horn's sitting there. He's stoic. He's good to go. He's fine. His team follows his example. But I think you're onto something where it kind of looks like Dave Van Horn freezes up or gets shell-shocked. Yeah. And then his players make those plays that maybe they're in the moment, maybe they're fine, but it doesn't seem like it from the outside.
Which is so surprising simply because out of anybody in the entire country, he's been there the most.
Yeah.
Actively, yeah. I should say. That like the experience in that on that stage and in that dugout is incredibly valuable. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that we are having this conversation is just so surprising. You asked about their assistant staff or assistant coaching staff. And this is where it's really interesting because I think about like at the SEC level when ACC job opens up or even mm-hmm. a lower tier SEC job opens up or a Big 10 or Big 12, whatever it might be. I think one of the most common places to look if you are I don't want to say middle of the road, but maybe even lower mm-hmm. tier SEC or baseball job is you look at SEC coaches and assistants. Mm-hmm. It's surprising to me because Matt Hobbs is their pitching coach who has been there now for 9 years. He just completed his 9th season as the pitching coach. And he was the D1 baseball assistant of the year in 2024. Nate Thompson is their hitting coach. He's been there for 8 years. And I sit here and I go, okay, Arkansas has been so good on a national stage. Why aren't other programs trying to get the assistants? Like that's just naturally part of it.
For every great program.
LSU is probably going to lose their assistant this year. Mm-hmm. And why? Because Jay Johnson was like standing on the podium, basically
pounding the table.
Pounding the table mm-hmm. and proclaiming how his assistant needed a head coaching job. Kevin Schnall did the same exact thing for his first base head coach or first mm-hmm. base coach 3 days ago before the national championship series. Now it's funny in hindsight because they both get tossed, but he talked about how invaluable he was to the success of their program. Mm-hmm. You hear that from Dave Van Horn, but as teams are identifying who they want as their next coach, you look at the most successful programs and who they're able to learn from. What is holding programs back from taking a chance on Matt Hobbs or Nate Thompson? And why are they staying away from them? Now,
it's one thing if
it could simply be them saying, I'm really happy where I'm at.
But that's a different conversation than them not getting interviews, which I haven't tracked a whole lot of that. Maybe they will, and that'll pick up again. But those are two wildly different conversations. If 100%. Arkansas's guys are saying, nope, I'm good, I'm not taking overtures because I think I'm going to take over for Dave Van Horn.
That's part of it.
Maybe they see that in the near future and they're comfortable in Fayetteville. They want to stick there. But if they're getting interviews and then getting turned down, that's a completely different sign for Arkansas.
It's a completely different sign. I mean, I'm fascinated, and I hate having these conversations because it makes me feel kind of slimy when we have these conversations of like, man, what's it going to be like when this dude retires? And because he's still actively coaching and he's still got a couple of years left, DVH does. But I think that there's something to be said of like, is Arkansas going to be okay with just hiring internally? Because look at how that's worked for A&M so far.
Has not.
They went the layup route. They started as number one team in the preseason poll, and they end up not even making the NCAA regional bracket. And so Arkansas is going to be one of the most sought after jobs when Dave Van Horn retires.
And I like Hunter Yurachek as AD. I think he'd be a pretty good guy to work for.
Yeah. And so through and through, it's like, are they going to turn down somebody that, like, you're looking at top 5 coaches in all of college baseball wanting this job? Are they going to want to turn that down to hire internally? And I think the answer has to be no, because it's not as simple as I think they might. Arkansas is one of the most successful in terms of winning percentage programs over the last 15 years. You can't lose that and go to a middle tier program.
No, you absolutely can't afford to. And Arkansas is not such a desirable job that it's impossible.
Yeah.
I think LSU being down in Baton Rouge, I mean, championships galore down there as well. And we'll get to that in our next segment here. But I think Arkansas baseball runs into some of the same problems that maybe Nebraska athletics does, right? You're in a good college town. You have your niche, but your bubble isn't unpoppable. It can burst if you make enough wrong decisions. So let's go ahead and take our first break here. When we get back for the second inning of Baseball Corner, let's dive into what happened in the championship series between LSU and Coastal Carolina. Tigers get another one. Kevin Schnall didn't even see the second inning, nor did his first base coach. What went into that decision? What is the NCAA saying? How do we react to that? We'll get to that and more in the second inning of the Baseball Corner.
You're listening to Baseball Corner with Nick Sainert and Austin Orman on 93.7 The Ticket. Now's the time to grab your snacks. The second inning is next. Hop in the batter's box because it's time for the second inning of the Baseball Corner with Nick Sainert and Austin Orman on 93.7 The Ticket.
That's right. Welcome back. Second inning of the Baseball Corner. Austin and Nick with you here on 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com. Good stuff on Arkansas in our first segment, but we got to talk about the championship series. Only lasts 2 games for LSU and Coastal Carolina. The Tigers come from the bottom of the bracket and they sweep the Chanticleers. The team saw 2 games. The head coach didn't. And Nick, this isn't to take away from LSU's accomplishment. Fantastic pitching from Anderson and Ayenson on the mound for those 2 games. We'll get to that. But unfortunately, the story of the weekend is Kevin Schnall getting tossed. A guy that I think did a lot of good for his program, made a lot of positive headlines. His press conferences in the Conway Regional, the Auburn Super Regional certainly made some waves. And then here we go again with Kevin Schnall in a good way, right? He's going to bat for his guys. He wasn't happy with how things were turning out. You know, maybe trying to motivate his guys, but the bottom of the first inning, and you're going to run a head coach, an established, brand in Coastal Carolina. Obviously, Kevin Schnall, it's his first year in charge. Obviously, it's a terrible look for the umpire, Angel Campos, who did that. It's hard to say if that had any effect on how the game went. We know baseball managers make some decisions, right? The lineup was already filled out. We know there's a lot of collaboration in that dugout when it comes to pitching changes. So certainly Kevin Schnall would have had a hand in that. But what a just ugly situation, ugly way to mar what should be, number one, a crowning achievement for LSU and really for college baseball, where you had one of the best teams all year, one of the biggest brands in LSU, and still a team that I think is kind of an upstart in Coastal Carolina, who's doing a lot to establish a lot of history and tradition. Not the way Sunday needed to go.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. It kind of smudges and tarnishes the way we look at the College World Series tournament as a whole this year. I'll ditto what you said, in that, not to take anything away from LSU, I also don't think that the result changes if Kevin Schnall is sitting in the dugout, right? Like, at the end of the day, you got to go win a baseball game. And Coastal's been around enough. There was enough guys still in the dugout that, losing your head coach and your first base coach, it certainly doesn't make things easier. But also, you've played 50 plus games together this year, and you've spent hundreds of days consecutively together because of practices and experiences. Right. Like, the camaraderie and the chemistry should not just be uprooted and discombobulated because your head coach gets tossed. I think if it is, then you're not playing in Omaha at the end of the year. So I think that there's something to be said with that. I I struggle to assign the blame to 100% of the umpire and 100% of Kevin Schnall.
Okay.
And the way that the reason I say that, it started for me right when I saw it, and I was watching it live. But as soon as I saw it, my mind immediately went to stop making it about you. You just inserted yourself into the game for no reason at all. You made a mark on a game as an umpire that was unnecessary to make. And then you come out and you hear Kevin Schnall talk about how he couldn't hear the warnings. He wanted an explanation, didn't want to get shooed by a grown man.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you made it look worse, or you had it look worse when the umpire falls over, and people had not thought initially that Kevin Schnall was the one that tripped him,
Mm-hmm.
or, pushed him over.
Yeah, bumped him, whatever.
Yeah, there was a lot of just, number one, misinformation that was out there. And I'm sure that in Kevin Schnall's post-game interview, he kept some things out, specifically some words that were said from him.
And he had plenty of time to think about it.
He had plenty of time to think about it. I'm sure there were more, non-FCC friendly words that were used in his conversation with Angel Campos. Now, it doesn't help that Angel Campos has a history of having a short fuse at both major leagues level and at the college baseball level.
Let's give people the stats on that. So Mike Swanson, former Royals, Diamondbacks, Team USA PR guy I follow on Twitter, says Angel Campos, the former big league umpire who tossed 23 guys in just a 5-year span, good feel for the game, chucking someone in the first inning of a national championship game. 23 ejections in 5 years from this guy. Then follow that up with this I saw on Twitter. Angel Campos, same umpire that threw out Cam Canarella in the NCAA tournament last year. Right. He was fired from Major League Baseball for being rabbit-eared and quick-triggered, and the NCAA puts him on their national championship game.
And to another thing to add that nobody's really talking about is the NCAA's national coordinator of umpires, George Grouches, is retiring after this Men's College World Series ends after 11 years on the job. So the guy that coordinates what umpires do what games is retiring, or now has retired after this Men's College World Series. So there's just a lot of just weird things. I had the conversation earlier today regarding, like, at the end of the day, we have to be careful not to drag on the umpires too much here, because I think, Austin, you and I are in the same boat of, we don't want there to be robot umpires. Like, we want the human piece of it. But this, unfortunately, I think is a side effect of it, because on a stage like that, with such a pro LSU crowd, as soon as...
Says the guy wearing the LSU shirt.
That's right. But as the LSU fan base, which basically is surrounding the entire lower bowl, as they start to stand up and get louder and louder and louder, as Kevin Schnall is arguing with Angel Campos, I have a feeling that both guys kind of just, like, after everything happened, Campos got back behind home plate, Schnall got back in the clubhouse, and both guys were like, holy crap, what just happened? All of that happened so fast. Did I make the right decision? Should I have done something differently? Because I think, especially for Angel Campos, because now you just made it, like I said, about you. Whether you meant to or not, you inserted a major decision into the biggest baseball game of the college baseball season.
In the first inning.
Yes.
It's one thing if it happens in the 4th or the 5th.
Yes.
It's one thing if it happens in the 7th or the 8th. But that's where I want to touch on Kevin Schnall. What could have possibly happened or been said that you had to make such a big deal out of that in the first inning?
Sure.
If that's what happened, right? I've been on record this podcasting before, Kevin Schnall fan, relatively anti-umpire. I'm more than happy to assign plenty of blame to Angel Campos. But if you're Kevin Schnall, how did you let that elevate to that point?
Yeah.
What did you say maybe that wasn't FCC friendly, that was such a big deal that you may or may not have deserved to have gotten run? Your team is down 1-0, but you also know your team is number 3 in RPI. You have a good team. Did you sense that they needed to get fired up early in the game? Sure. Is that why you did what you did? Did you have a grudge with Angel Campos from the night before? Obviously, they don't have the same guy calling balls and strikes 2 nights in a row. Was there something that happened in the field that all of us missed the night before? And did you make it personal all of a sudden? Why did you think the first inning was the time to go out and make this scene? Why didn't you wait until between innings? Right? Let the game settle in a little bit. in a game like that, I get it. The margins are so thin. You're walking on the edge of a razor. And I've never been in Kevin Schnall's shoes. I don't want to pretend to know what's going on. But from this vantage point, it seems like maybe during the course of play in the first inning wasn't the right time for Kevin Schnall to have that conversation, especially in that manner.
I think that there's also something to be said about Coastal Carolina was in a position that they had not been in since April 21st. They were in a spot, or April 22nd, I should say, because they lost the day before.
Yeah.
And they had not lost since April 21st or April 22nd.
Yeah.
And I think that there was something to be said about on the stage that you were on. You like, we can sit here and talk about how meaningful it is and the magnitude of it, but I think it's another thing to actually experience it and play in it, I'm sure.
Sure.
And the moment we talked about it last segment with Vahiva Loy or even for Arkansas and Dave Van Horn, the lights of Charles Schwab Field in the College World Series get the best of some guys.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment, you combine the fact that I mean, Coastal Carolina and LSU, they were chippy the entire weekend.
Yeah.
And with game one and things like that, there was some stuff going on behind the scenes. Now, on top of that is you include the fact that Coastal Carolina, who is not accustomed to losing,
right,
is coming off of a loss in the most meaningful game that they played up until this point of the season. And you mentioned the margin for error is so small or so thin that Kevin Schnall, it just snapped. Because if you were a calm, cool, level-headed coach, you would have sat there and said, okay, let us allow tempers and the feelings to just subside for another out or two. We'll go and have an adult-like conversation. If you can't hear why you were warned, well then, whether you get warned with one out in the bottom of the first, or whether you get warned and have that conversation with 2 outs in the bottom of the first and wait until the middle of the inning to do it, you're still warned. That they're not taking that warning away because you go out there instantaneously and go have a conversation. So maybe part of that's experience, but the other part of that is understanding, okay, just naturally I can't hear right now. So instead of getting into a shouting match where something can get misinterpreted.
And volume is so often interpreted for anger.
Yes. So go think about the situation, the possibilities, and the way that it could get misinterpreted just as the same as it could get interpreted. And say, we're going to wait till the middle of the inning. I'm going to go out and have a conversation. You'd probably be able to have one that's on less of a national scale too, because you disrupted the gameplay, the game flow, and you made everybody just sit there and watch, which then made the LSU crowd rowdier. And that's makes it worse for everybody because then adrenaline starts pumping. Angel Campos makes an impulsive decision. Kevin Schnall says some things on impulse, and you blew it way out of proportion, and now you're not coaching the rest of the game.
It was just 8.5 innings then that Kevin Schnall didn't see, and his team does end up falling 5-3. Let's give some flowers here to LSU, Nick. Only 6 runs across the 2 games. Yeah. Not usually enough to get it done in college baseball, but both LSU and Coastal were led by pitching. When you look at that 1-0 game, what Cade Anderson did, obviously complete game shutout, 3 hits, 5 walks, but 10 strikeouts on 130 pitches. He aired it out. LSU scored in the first, and that held up. And then in the deciding game, again, it was early offense for LSU. 1 in the third, 4 in the fourth. Coastal Carolina gets that late home run from the bottom of their order in Sykes. It wasn't enough. But if you look at what Anderson did, what Ayenson did, it was incredible work from that LSU pitching staff, really all weekend long. But talk about the moment not getting to your 2 studs. LSU's 2 biggest names delivered. Yeah,
they certainly do, right? And Anthony Ayenson, who it was questionable on how he starts games because all year long it's been he's come out, struggled with control for the first couple of innings. And maybe that's another part of Kevin Schnall where he looked at that and said, there's a pitcher on the mound that consistently this season has struggled in the early stages of games. Once he settles in the middle innings, that's where he's at his best. And so maybe he felt like early on there was this precedent set that he needed to fight for his guys, especially when it came to balls and strikes, and saying that don't give this guy on the mound that has consistently struggled in the early stages of games, don't give him stuff to make him settle in earlier,
right,
to allow him to settle in earlier. Because maybe I would imagine that Kevin Schnall was going to sit there and told his guys, look, the most important innings of this game are the first 3. We need good start from Morrison on the mound for us, who's our guy. But then on top of that, we need to get to Ianson early because that is when he's at his worst. We cannot allow him to settle in. He ends up settling in right from the get-go. It was a dream start for LSU and Ianson. And he ends up getting what was like 4 strikeouts in his first 6 batters that he faced. And so you get that early home run though from Sykes, like you said, or excuse me, the early home run in the early stages to go up 1-0, and you sit there and go, okay, this is what Coastal Carolina needed, right? To try to get on to Ianson quick. They did so. They couldn't get any more than that solo shot, and that's a testament to LSU and the way that they win games this year. Because in the past few years, we talked about it: home run ball, big hits, timely hitting from power guys in the lineup. This year, though, pitching, defense, manufacture runs. Sure, they can hit the long ball because they're as good of an SEC team as they come. But at the end of the day, that's not how they consistently won games. And Jay Johnson said that actually in the pregame on the national radio broadcast, where it was, look, I've been really proud of my guys because we've won those games scoring double-digit runs here in the College World Series. But he said we've also won a 1-0 game. We just won a 1-0 ball game yesterday. Now it's on the shoulders of Cade Anderson, but he said we're going to have to win a similar one today. And when you get down to fundamental baseball, you know this, Austin, when it's fundamental baseball, one-run games, the one-run differentials are extremely important between a team that goes to the postseason and has success and somebody that's going to Cancun for vacation after their conference tournament.
Oh, absolutely. So big shout out to LSU, title number 8 in program history. Before we get out of here for this segment, Nick, again, no knock to LSU, deserving champion, absolutely. But when you look back at some of the recent champions, I feel like this is going to be one that kind of fades into the background a little quicker.
Sure.
You think about the big characters from Tennessee last year, the big names from LSU 2 years ago, Ole Miss, one of the last teams in the field in 2022. The year before that, Bednar and Sims from Mississippi State, shoving in Omaha. That 2019 Vandy team, I put kind of in the same boat as this LSU team. 2018 Oregon State, the way that they won that championship is going to stand out. And then we'll end this with the 2017 Florida team that's near and dear to my heart. Yep. A lot of former Royals or current Royals and former Royals on that 2017 Florida team that won 52 games. And then 2016 Coastal, right? Yep. That was kind of their moment 10 years ago. Congrats LSU. We talked a lot about them, their brand. They had some really good players on this year's team. But I do feel like this is going to be one of those championships that maybe kind of fades into the woodwork pretty quickly.
You're right. And that's interesting to think about because I'm going through the teams and going, okay, what if this team would have won? Who would we remember from that team that, like we talk about, Vandy and Dansby Swanson, and we talk about Vandy with Kumar and Jack Leiter and Oregon State with Adley Rutschman and Trevor Larnach. Like we remember those. I'm trying to think like the name that we're going to remember is probably Kyle Anderson.
Cade Anderson,
yeah, excuse me, not Kyle Anderson, not the basketball player. Cade Anderson, or maybe Jones. Maybe. But then I'm sitting there going like, okay, let's say Arkansas would have won. Who is that notable name that sticks out? This is
depends on how big a series Alloy has.
Sure, maybe. But like that's not the.
Well, you remember the Gage Wood no hitter, which wasn't in the championship.
Yes, it wasn't in the championship. Okay, so then like I think about like UCLA or Oregon State. Like these guys, these programs have top Major League Baseball draft picks, but it's not the star-studded tagline that goes along with them that has been there in the past with Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. And you knew that LSU had the number 1 and number 2 overall picks on their team in 2023.
Even Wyatt Langford and Kaggs in that same year.
Yes, and so like it just didn't feel like there was star power, which maybe made the College World Series, it gave it parity. And
feel more open.
Yeah, right. It made it feel more open, which I think it truly was. Like LSU ended up winning, but I think if you go into this College World Series and said, all right, look at what game and what team do you feel like has the upper hand? I think whoever won that LSU Arkansas opening day game, that's the team that you kind of were riding for the national championship. The other 6 teams, though, it felt like it was all open. It felt like it was all open. Maybe not Murray State. Like we wanted the Cinderella piece, but in all reality there, you probably didn't feel like they had a great shot. So still 5 teams. Like I thought Oregon State was going to show up better than they did.
I agree.
I was surprised by the way UCLA showed up. I was surprised by the way Louisville showed up. And so through and through, I just, there was not a whole lot of star-studded names that I think right off the bat, like you said, we're going to look back, and this is going to be kind of one that might fade after, 5 or 10 years.
And again, congrats to LSU. And maybe that's healthy for college baseball, where you have a bunch of parity getting to Omaha. But I think for a sport that continues to grow, it's nice to have those big marquee names coming into Omaha.
I think also Jay Johnson showed he's a heck of a coach.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was nice to talk to Patrick Coogan. From LSU, the benefactor who gave us the shirts that Nick is wearing. So shout out to Patrick Coogan for that, talking about the differences between the guy he played for, Coach Bertman, and then Coach Johnson as well. Go back and check that out. It was during On the Block if you missed the podcast of that. We got one more inning to go here on the Baseball Corner. We'll switch gears a little bit, talk about 5 minutes of Major League Baseball action, get you out of here, set up for the rest of Ticket Weeknights right after this.
You're listening to the Baseball Corner with Nick Sainert and Austin Orman on 93.7 The Ticket. It's time for the second inning stretch. Get out of your seat, stretch, and get ready for the third inning. Grab your glove and hit the dirt. It's time for the third inning of the Baseball Corner with Nick Sainert and Austin Orman on 93.7 The Ticket.
All right, third inning of the Baseball Corner, bringing in the closers. You have two guys on the mound for this one, Austin Orman and Nick Sainert with you. Bringing in the closers, but we're talking starting pitching. Two of the best in the business, especially as you look at young guys coming up in just a couple days. Wednesday afternoon, it was already announced, we'll get Jacob Misiorowski versus Paul Skeens in Milwaukee. It's fascinating, exciting matchup for a number of reasons. Let's start with you here, Nick, though.
Yeah.
Both these guys are in the NL Central. They're both shoving. They're both just off the charts nuts. We know Paul Skeens for a couple years, but now here comes Jacob Misiorowski throwing 100, 102. Oh, and by the way, has a 96-mile-an-hour slider.
Yeah.
What is the NL Central in for over these next few years?
Well, I think it's important. Maybe not so much for Misiorowski. I think it's more so for Paul Skeens. Does he stay in the NL Central? Like
Sure.
the fact that we're even having the conversations that Paul Skeens could be dealt, not necessarily maybe at this trade deadline, but whether it's in the offseason, like Paul Skeens has walked into that clubhouse, and partially maybe because the Pirates fired their manager early in the season, he's kind of got say already in what his future looks like.
Yeah.
And it's kind of bizarre because there's not a lot of other organizations that would allow for that to happen. I mean, not to say that these guys shouldn't be in control or shouldn't have an opinion on how their career plays out, especially when they're still under their rookie deal. But at the end of the day, I think the way that Paul Skeens handles himself, he's not an outspoken person. He's not very loud. He doesn't come across as arrogant, that he knows he's one of the best pitchers in the game right now. But, and he knows that he's probably on one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball right now.
Yeah.
And so I look more so at the way the organization has operated in the past, and the way that they've treated guys like Garrett Cole, and the way that they've treated other pitchers that they've faced.
Tyler Glasnow.
And there's another one that I'm certainly missing with the Pittsburgh Pirates. But the way that they've operated and their unwillingness to sign notable names on the mound tells me that,
or anywhere,
yeah, sure. Well, they extended Key Brian Hayes, and O'Neal Cruz is still there.
Right.
But you're still, I mean, think about those two names that we just said.
Their biggest free agent contracts the last decade is a 1 year, $5 million.
That's right. And so I just have a tough time believing that Paul Skeens is a Pirate for much longer. Now, I also don't think that it's as simple as, put him to New York or to the Dodgers. I actually don't think it's that simple. I think it'd be bad for his career to go to New York.
Paul Skeens is headed to the Colorado Rockies so he can go back to the Air Force quicker when he's done playing. You heard it here first. He's turning around their fortunes.
Sure. No, but I wonder about landing spots for Paul Skeens, and I'm thinking, okay, for somebody that's early in their career, if he has say in where he goes, or if he at this point in his career, find a pitcher-friendly ballpark. I think guys are so quick to just willingly jump to New York or LA Dodger or the Dodgers. Yeah, big markets. And they don't think about this stuff. Like, you can go get that money after, in your next contract.
Right.
Go get that money. But for these early stages in your career, find a park that suits you really well. And then find a team that's hopefully a contender too. Because guess what? If you put up consistent statistics at a park like that and you're winning and your team is winning, then that's only going to bring the more money later on when you're looking for a contract deal and you're going to get an offer from the Yankees or the Dodgers.
Trying to find the Park Effects leaderboard here. Let's see. What's maybe the best one? So Park Factor, I guess, from StatCast Baseball Savant right here. Do you know the best pitcher's park in baseball? Top of your head?
So this is not just because they're on our station. Like Kauffman's up there.
Kauffman, funny enough, is not up there.
Okay.
Kauffman is a good hitter's park. Okay. It's not a good home run park.
Okay.
This year, at least, Kauffman Stadium is tied with 7 total stadiums with a weighted runs created plus park factor of above 100.
Okay. So maybe that was what I needed to say differently. It is not a home run friendly ballpark.
Right.
Okay.
But you get a lot of hits to fall in.
Yes.
Kind of just like Coors as well.
Yeah.
The best pitcher's park in baseball, and it's been this way for a couple of years, T-Mobile Park in Seattle. A 91 WRC plus. That's good for pitchers. Funny enough, American Family Field in Milwaukee is one of those.
San Francisco
is there. Wrigley is actually the fifth best pitcher's park. So I'll allow you to dream a little bit on a Paul Skeens trade.
That's where I was looking at thinking, okay, what's a realistic landing spot? They're probably not going to trade him in division. They'd be stupid to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that rules out, like places like Busch with the Cardinals, and obviously the Cubs are in that other one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you have to find, I don't think it's impossible for a team to maybe go and try to grab Paul Skeens at the deadline, but then it's like, okay, what team is going to want to give up all of the assets that they have for this guy? So you have to look at like best farm systems in baseball. The Cubs do have one of the best farm systems in baseball. And so I'm thinking like, who needs starting pitching? Who could always, use a Paul Skeens, pitcher friendly ballpark, and has the resources to be able to make a move happen. Sure, the Cubs are up there, but I think the Pirates would be stupid to move them in division. That'd be just so dumb. So I don't know. I think that another thing to kind of put into perspective through all of this is I think the trade deadline at this year is going to be kind of quiet. I don't expect. I was just reading an article earlier this morning. I can't remember the website of the publication. I think it was ESPN, but they were talking about how there's only 6 teams right now that are actually out of the playoff race. You're not going to see guys or organizations sell dramatically because they're going to look at this and go, maybe we're just one piece away. Maybe we're just one guy that we can call up from the minors instead, that we can say, okay, this is going to be able to take us, move us 2 spots up in the wild card standings to be able to make the playoffs. Or we just have to hold out. Like the Royals are fascinating because they have such good arms on the mound and in the bullpen right now, yet they cannot get anything from their outfield.
Not a thing.
And so
outside of a really cool catch from Jack Caglione. Shout out him for that, by the way.
Here's the thing is I think the Royals' most notable name at the deadline is going to be MJ Melendez.
I'm going to push back on that.
Okay.
I think it's Lugo.
Okay.
I think it's Seth Lugo, maybe Waka. I know he just signed an extension, but if you think he's going to maintain, the nuclear option is Bubic.
Okay.
I don't think you do it, especially with Reagan's hurt. But then I think if you're looking to move a controllable start, Lugo's on an expiring or it's a player option. Do they look at Noah Cameron? Do they look at trading him? If they think Cole Reagans is going to come back healthy, can you sell high on a guy like that? I don't think so. I think that would be the gutsiest move that JJ Piccolo might ever make as a GM.
The reason I said MJ Melendez is because I think that's a guy that just needs fresh starts.
Oh, I completely agree.
I think the Royals need to they need a fresh start from him. He's starting to hit better at AAA. He's had a couple of home runs the last couple of weeks as well. He's starting to hit better. He's starting to get back to MJ, at least not doing the tearing things up at the AAA level like we saw at this beginning of his career, but just needs a fresh scenery. And so I think he's going to be a name that we see floated around, but also what's the return for him? Like there's not a whole lot of return.
You'll probably
MJ
package
Melendez.
him with someone.
Exactly. And so I just still look at it like and maybe we can get into this next week, but like the Cags experiment is still fascinating to me because sure, he hit 2 home runs against the Rangers, right? And he's had a nice play in right field, and he's dealing with Rusty Kuntz and things like that. But ultimately, the rest of the guys in that outfield are just that.
The only reason Jack Caglione is playing right field right now is because Gavin Cross isn't.
Sure.
That's really what it comes down to for the Royals. Gavin Cross is essentially a non-prospect at this point. Tyler Gentry hasn't really gotten much of a shot.
That's right.
Kind of in that John Rave boat. Do they believe in him? Do they not? Kind of seems like not at this point. Yeah, I think Melendez is certainly on the block, but I don't think he gets you much. I think he's a throw-in. Cam Devaney, you maybe missed the boat on him, not trading him when you did. He's still fine, right? The numbers are still there. But, I know teams like to wait till the trade deadline to see who they are and what they have. But that's where I think you really got to credit organizations like Tampa, what they've done in the long run, identifying what kind of a year it is for them, making those moves on the margin, just understanding who they are as an organization.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I know we're up against the clock here, but I think ultimately when it's all said and done, the Royals have some decisions to make. I think they don't have the sexiest of farm systems by any means. And that's the way that they win games. Like it would be outside of the Royals' MO to like buy heavy at the deadline on some guys that they're not going to be able to re-sign. And it just wouldn't feel right. It wouldn't feel Royals-esque.
It would not.
To sit here and be like, yeah, they're going to trade away this guy in Noah Cameron that's been absolutely so strong in his early stages of his career. I just think that it would be so anti-Royals. But now, granted, it's the other part of with JJ Piccolo. You called Cags up when you did, and you've made these decisions with starting pitching and other guys when you did, because you felt like this year was a year where you have to also build and supplement your superstar Bobby Witt Jr. You have to supplement him. And so he took a chance on you, signing a contract before the 2024 season. Fortunately for the Royals, you were able to ink him to that deal. Now you have to do your part. You cannot, I'm not saying it's getting there at all, but you cannot allow Bobby Witt Jr. to become unhappy.
You have 5 years.
Yes.
The end of this year and then 5 more years after that, because the player opt-outs, he's got 4 of them. They start in 2031. He'll have a player opt-out every year after that. And then in 2035, it's when you get back to club options. And so really, what do you do to maximize the team around Bobby Witt Jr. this year? Maybe, but I don't think this is the year to go all in. There's some of that conversation before when the Royals were riding high. The pitching staff has been good. You've seen injuries knock it back a little bit. You have to go in enough to be competitive, which the Royals are still second or third in the AL Central right now. Yeah. But the problem is you don't have much of a farm system to sell. So you're trading from major league talent, which is going to handicap you or just move your problems from one area to the other. Before we let you go, Nick, what do the Cubs have this week? What are you looking out for Chicago?
Well, their bullpen, and this is so anti-Chicago Cubs of the past, their bullpen is exceptional right now. They are the starting pitching hasn't been great since Justin Steele hit the IL. Right. Obviously, Shota is slowly working his way back. But the bullpen has stepped up dramatically. Now they got boat raced by the Mariners over the weekend. I think it was like a 14-6 final. But Pete Crow Armstrong is literally a true MVP candidate right now. And it's so bizarre to think about. But the Cubs are going to have multiple All-Stars representing Chicago in the upcoming All-Star game. We're almost to the halfway point. We're like, what is it? Almost 80 games into the season right now. So we're almost to the All-Star break. It's just a matter of this first half could not have gone better for the Chicago Cubs. They've had a couple of injuries, which certainly did not help, but they've done enough to still win games. They're approaching 50 wins on the season, and they have around 30 losses. So you talk about that. The NL Central isn't super strong this year, which is beneficial certainly for them. They're going to be a playoff team. They're going to be a team that has a chance to do some things. The unfortunate piece is that the National League is absolutely stacked. Yeah, I will be utterly shocked if the World Series champion does not come from the National League. Just from like, you could face the Dodgers in the National League championship series, or in the DS. You're sitting there, or you could face
San Diego's good, San Francisco's good, the Mets, the Phillies,
and so that is where it's like, okay, I'm interested to see what they do at the deadline. You see the difference between we've compared it off air, Austin. The differences between like Seiya Suzuki and how he approached the season, getting his like defensive job taken away from him in comparison to Rafael Devers with the Boston Red Sox. Like that type of thing matters. But also now, if you go into the second half of the season and you're in first place of the NL Central and you are firmly in the playoff race, there's two things. You need to be active at the deadline. You need to fill holes that you have. And there's not many of them with the Cubs, but there are a couple, right? First base is one of them. Do you feel confident with Justin Turner over there consistently? Third base is another one. Is how much confidence do you have in a guy like Matt Shaw going forward in this season and things like that? But also, this is why you're paying Craig Counsell $8 million a year, right? Is to go win you meaningful baseball games when it matters most. It didn't show last year. There was some disappointment from Craig Counsell's first year in year one. Show us why you went out and basically reset the entire managerial market by paying this guy $8 million.
Absolutely.
A year.
Right. You pay him to make the tough decisions and to win the big games. So Chicago certainly having some of those. For the Royals this week, they host the Rays, and then I am lucky enough to be at the Royals-Dodgers series finale on Sunday. Excited for that. That is going to be a blast. It'll be the night after a wedding.
Okay.
Got to make the drive down, a late night wedding. Then it's a 1:10 first pitch. But you know what? Darn if we're not going to make it. We're going to get there. We're going to have a good time. It's going to be Royals-Dodgers. Of course, you can hear that right here on these airwaves, 93.7 The Ticket. For Nick, I'm Austin. It's been a blast. Thanks for tuning in to Baseball Corner. We'll catch you again soon.